Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Hi. Welcome to Beyond Baroque Literary Arts Center, and welcome to The Bats Have Left the Bell Tower, a CalArts Next Words reading. I'm Jimmy Vega. I'm the Assistant Director of Beyond Baroque. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge Beyond Baroque's presence on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Gabrielino Tonga peoples. We acknowledge the wrong done to these peoples through settler colonialism, genocidal practices, and the violent disposition of their land. A very brief, some brief words about Beyond Baroque. We first started as an experimental literary magazine founded in 1968. We have done our thing for 55 years and happy to open the doors to some of our CalArts graduates today. I won't say too much, but I will say that I'm super excited that we were able to kind of have this reading today. As an alum of CalArts, it really means a lot to have you all into the space and read here with us today. For the readers today, I just want to make a note that the mic is omnidirectional, so you don't have to move it. It should be capturing your voices pretty well. And I will pass it on to our host this afternoon, Brandon Cooper. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you, Jimmy. I can't see anyone, so this is really awesome. Not that I don't want to see you or admire your presence here. Thank you for being here. Glad you could all make it. I think everyone knows, but just for the edification of all, this is the first of 3 Next Words events. The next one is at the Ripped Bodice bookstore, May 2nd, 7 p.m. The third one is May 3rd at 7 p.m., 2220 Arts and Archives, otherwise known as the Poetic Research Bureau. If you're going to all 3, you're sold on all 3, that's great. If you're on the fence, I must warn you not to let this afternoon's program influence your decision too much. Either way, if you love it, maybe, but hopefully you love it. It's going to be good. Our first reader tonight, or this afternoon, I beg your pardon, is Andrew Hubble. He is endemic to Southern California. In even the most hectic situations, he possesses a certain Hippocratic calm, like those country diagnosticians of Imperial Russia who, navigating the taiga by troika on frosty December nights, coolly remove their stethoscopes to register the weak heartbeat of a neurasthenic boy who will soon grow into a robust lad of the sporting type, and will perhaps later, who knows, serve as special envoy to China. His entire affect, his whole manner, is shot through to the very fingertips with a sensibility that predates the advent of nearly sentient telephones, social media, and its rhetorics, a sensibility I confess to finding all too enviable. Rest assured, he is no creaky atavist. An amateur blurbist, pressed for comments on a publication of his I pray will arrive in haste, may write, zippy, euphonious, and odd fiction, Andrew Hubble plays hardball. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Hubble.
Thanks, Brandon. And thanks to Jimmy and Beyond Baroque and everyone here for showing up. I'm going to be reading from an abridged version of a short story. It's sort of an experiment in abridgment that I guess we'll all find out together if this was a good idea or not, but it's called Better Than Rats. I know I am better than the rats. The rats have no imagination. When they die, it doesn't matter. Sometimes the mothers get confused and eat their babies. The rats are morons. Don't get me wrong, it's not like we don't eat each other from time to time, but at least we know why. I think the bald man is late today. At some point he'll walk through those doors, ignoring me at first, futzing with the instruments, checking on the others. Hating him has become my primary pastime, yet I await his arrival as though he were someone dear to me. I feel disappointment when his footsteps continue past the door, carrying him to some other room. If killing the bald man were the only thing preventing my escape, I'd have done so long ago. It wouldn't be difficult. First, I would break his jaw so he couldn't bite. Then I'd make his hands useless by chewing through the tendons in his wrists. Then I'd tear his genitals out by the root. End of story. His footsteps are advancing along the hallway. I hear the sound of the heavy door in my mind, then I hear the real sound. He walks slowly around the perimeter of the room, looking into the cages, scribbling, nodding at the others, frowning at the rats. I never take my eyes off him. Now he's approaching my cage, looking a little annoyed. He sticks a silver instrument through the wire mesh to push the gadget toward me. I do not respond. He makes the gadget light up somehow. I remain unimpressed. He shakes his head and scribbles some more. The cage is not the problem either. Many of us, myself included, know how to let ourselves out of the cages. The problem lies on the other side of the door through which he enters every morning. Beyond that door are countless others like him, beyond the next door exponentially more, and so on. An attack would be a declaration of war, and we simply don't have the numbers to stage such an offensive. As it stands, killing him would be suicidal. This is the crux of our dilemma. I'm not like the bald man, though our differences are difficult to pin down. I suspect the distinction has to do with the strange instruments he wields. After all, it was only through tools that he managed to get us into these cages. It's clear that he and his kind are specialists in trickery, yet his motivations remain mysterious to me. Above all else, one question preys on my mind. When is he going to eat us? My comrades are a sorry lot. More and more I find myself appalled by their foolhardy reactions to our plight. Walter and Irma, for instance, never seem to quit playing with the gadgets. They seem convinced that once they have solved the riddle of these things, they'll be free. Perhaps they believe the bald man seeks to initiate us into the mysteries of his power. Albert and Schultz engage with the gadgets only fleetingly, bellowing in frustration after a few minutes, then staring at their feet in anguish. I myself remain skeptical. I learned long ago to trust nothing that comes through the door of the cage. Today they took Albert away. For a while, all that remained in his cage was his gadget, but then someone came and removed that too. Nobody seems to know where Albert has been taken or whether he will be returned. Maybe they're going to finally start eating us. It would be of some relief to know that our ordeal was at least governed by logic. Walter and Irma seem oblivious to Albert's disappearance. All day long, they manipulate their gadgets, pausing only to compare findings. Their hope is preposterous. On the other hand, I have to admit they may be onto something when it comes to the gadgets. I'm far from convinced that playing with them will lead to our freedom, but I do suspect that there is some relationship between the gadget and the power the bald man holds over us. Albert has been returned to his cage with his head wrapped in cloth. Although I'd like to believe they ate part of his head and are saving the rest of him for later, I fear their motives may be more sinister. Albert is behaving strangely. He is no longer given access to a gadget. He just sits there with his mouth agape, staring straight ahead, masturbating at intervals. We have begun to confer with one another at night, speculating about the nature of Albert's condition and what it might mean for the rest of us. Schultz has appointed himself leader. So far, nobody has challenged him. Schultz reads our apathy and cowardice as proof of his exceptional nature, and his boldness increases. It's an unfortunate cycle. I'm in no position to criticize my fellows, though, since I myself have done nothing to curb Schultz's runaway ego. I'm forced to admit that some of Schultz's ideas are compelling. It seems clear that the bald man aims to reduce us all to Albert's state, at which point resistance will become impossible. Schultz argues that we must act quickly. He understands also that, while clandestine escape would be ideal, it is not likely. Our only chance, he says, lies in killing. This means, of course, that some of us will be killed as well. Schultz's frenzied speeches have convinced the others that our deaths no longer matter, so long as they contribute to the liberation of at least one survivor. I can't help but think that this reduces us to the status of the rats, whose deaths most assuredly do not matter. Our escape is set for tomorrow night. The only ones who seem wary of the whole endeavor are Walter and Irma, who believe they are on the cusp of uncovering the secret of the gadgets. At one point, they even asked Schultz if they could stay behind. Naturally, he refused their request, but conceded that they could bring the gadgets with them if they liked. Schultz has charged me with carrying Albert on my back. This duty is even more onerous than it sounds. Something about Albert's idiocy makes him heavier than normal, and he expels urine and feces without warning. Schultz understands that hoisting Albert will make it impossible for me to fight. I'm encouraged to defend myself as best I can, but my prime directive is to get Albert to safety. I'm to be flanked by Schultz at the front and Walter and Irma at the rear. There is some talk of liberating the rats as a matter of principle, but we decide against it. The rats would have no idea what to do with their freedom. We make it as far as the hallway before the bald man appears from a distant door. Schultz wastes no time. He charges down the hallway and pounces. Within seconds, he is sitting athwart the bald man's chest, his fingers wrapped around the bottom row of teeth as his other hand rains steady, focused blows upon the jawbone. It is marvelous to behold. I am made aware that the jawbone has broken when the bald man's childish shrieks become drowned glottal sobs. Schultz is no slouch. He is already working the right wrist with his teeth, unfazed by the wild blows he receives from the bald man's other hand. The four of us advance toward the carnage. Schultz breaks the right arm over his knee for good measure, and the jagged bone ends spew jets of black blood in two opposing arcs. The left arm is barely moving now, but Schultz snaps it anyway, perhaps emboldened by our cheering. For we have not taken the opportunity to flee, but have instead encircled the bald man. I am so invested in the spectacle that I lower Albert to the ground so that we can both revel more completely. Though the bald man is unconscious now, Schultz reaches for the groin anyway, finding the soft meat buried there beneath the beige material he covers himself with. Schultz is struggling to tear the dangling flesh from the body on account of the strong fabric. Finally, it comes loose, fabric and all. Schultz holds his spoils over our heads, and we rejoice in the warm rain of fluid and gobbets. We are all looking at one another now, blood-drunk and gore-dappled, our chests heaving. For a moment, our eyes become veiled with shame at the idea that we were so easily distracted from our mission. All except Albert, who has begun to masturbate. It is at this vulnerable moment that three unfamiliar men emerge from a door at the far end of the hall. They are all carrying instruments, one of which makes a high-pitched droning noise. Walter and Irma begin to fiddle desperately with their gadgets, occasionally looking up at the men in supplication. Schultz begins to look askance at the two of them. Walter and Irma share a glance as if each one suspects the other, then they look back at Schultz imploringly. Schultz accuses them of treachery. He seems to be on the point of attacking them when the three men begin running toward us. "Save Albert," Schultz shouts. Then he beckons to Walter and Irma, and the three charge their respective adversaries. Schultz attacks the one with the droning instrument and is bleeding from his face almost instantly. He fights admirably for a few moments, but before long his face has become a structureless mess and he falls to the floor in a wet heap. Meanwhile, Irma is being bludgeoned repeatedly with a large wooden club. Walter is going for his opponent's eyes as the latter plugs away at his torso with a small, shiny instrument. I cannot see the damage being done to Walter's body, only the blood that pools at the feet of his assailant. I hoist Albert onto my back, and he chuckles as if being tickled. I run toward the back of the doors, expecting them to be fastened, but they are not. In an instant, we are actually outside the building, breathing in the smells of the world. I haven't been outside since I was a child. I am overwhelmed by a flood of indistinct, imageless memory. Then I become seized by panic. I look over both shoulders, expecting to encounter an even larger number of men with even more fearsome instruments, but nobody is there. I hoist Albert high on my shoulders and head for a dense layer of trees that looms in the distance. For the last 3 days, we've been living in the middle of a forest whose magnitude I'll probably never learn. The tree we are living in is no better or worse than the hundreds that surround it. It is simply the one I collapsed under after carrying Albert as far as I could manage. So far, there is no evidence to suggest that we are being pursued. The disadvantages of living outside the walls have begun to make themselves apparent. The nights have grown cold and food is becoming scarce. All the same, I have no regrets about our escape. Behind the walls, suffering was certain. Make no mistake, danger abounds in this place as well, but the assailants here are killers, plain and simple. They're not interested in toying with us. Plus, there's always the chance that we might defeat them. This prospect, all but absent in my previous habitation, inspires hope, however foolish. Sometimes I envy Albert. He sits beneath our tree all day, grinning, accepting with gratitude what fruits I am able to forage. He has even begun to recognize elements of the outside world. This change could be due to the time we've spent outside the walls, although more likely it has to do with the distance we've placed between ourselves and the gadgets. Albert is particularly fond of birds. I myself have never seen one until recently, although I had certainly heard of them. He sits in the dirt at the base of our tree with his bandaged head tilted backward, scanning the patches of sky above the uppermost branches, groaning. I don't know what will become of Albert and I. In all likelihood, I will scrabble away in this forest until I freeze or am eaten by something. I won't let this happen to Albert, though. When the time comes, I'll eat him myself. Thank you.
Our next reader is Madeline Jane Auble, Woman of Mystery. While she is a proud Angelino, she's been known to play cross-continental hopscotch, equally at ease in New Mexico or Queens. Her writing is a unique document of womanhood in the 21st century, rife with parlous, hair-raising episodes that a lesser scribe, venal and salacious, obeying the edicts of the bestseller with the lackeys bent back, would let stand on their own. Luckily for us, they come from a brain steeped in American cinema of the 20th century, San Franciscan history, fashion, anti-stalker laws, and all things old Hollywood. She is as likely to expound on Howard's End as she is on Lisa Rinna. An ardent chronicler of times bleak and times to come, please join me in welcoming on stage Madeline Jane Auble.
Whoa, that's bright. Okay. Sharon Stone took up too much space for people's comfort. She was the epitome of womanhood when I was the age where I needed to learn what that was. And ironically, she was the age I am now, 37, when making Scorsese's 1995 film Casino. Stone's character Ginger taught me a lot about men, most of which has proved to be remarkably accurate. Seeing through her eyes was my only experience of the film, so I find it shocking when fellow feminists find her character to be unredeemable. I don't think she is the one in need of redemption, but like femme fatales before her, she became the receptacle of everyone else's failures. Ginger is positioned as greedy without any thought to how money is the only power and freedom she has access to. Ginger is a literal whore, perhaps as penance for the space she inhabits, she must suck dick for cash. Call it American cinema's brand of realism, a nod to the realities of the inequities between the sexes. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't prefer her to be a scientist because quite frankly, it is not relatable. Casino is adapted from a true story, and Stone's character Ginger is based on a real woman. Her name was Jerry McGee. Robert De Niro's character Sam Ace Rothstein was also based on a real person, Frank Lefty Rosenthal. Joe Pesci played Nicky, the resident gangster, and James Wood plays Ginger's old pimp boyfriend, Lester Diamond. Both are amalgamations of real people. The film is a retelling of the 1970s in Las Vegas, the gangsters that for a brief time ran the town, and their subsequent fall from grace. Ginger is a hustler, a showgirl, a prostitute, aka a female cowboy. Sam is an odds maker sent in from Chicago to run the Tangiers casino. They meet and then marry, even though Ginger explicitly states she does not love Sam and feels like she will be handicapped in the deal, meaning that she will not be able to make her own living as his wife. He assures her of her safety with gifts of cash and jewels, mistaking her love of money for something other than a desire for agency. Ginger is still in love and in a relationship with Lester. He remains in her life and continues to squeeze her for cash. Nicky, Sam's friend and male cowboy character, comes to Vegas and begins to set up shop as the muscle. Wildly violent and all too willing to play both sides between Ginger and Sam, Nicky ends up sleeping with Ginger and subsequently pushing her down as she is already falling. By the film's end, Sam loses his casino, Nicky is buried in the desert, and Ginger's ODs from a hot shot in a motel. Ginger's story begins when she is spotted on security camera by Sam pocketing lavender $1,000 chips. Ginger stands on the casino floor in a short white sequined dress with a peekaboo halter neckline encrusted with multicolored beads at her throat. Her hair is in a blonde coif that is a cross between Sandra Dee and Anne Margaret. Her era-specific glamour is accented with blue painted eyes and coral red lips. She has a thin gold chain handbag hanging from her shoulder, the same bag she sneaks lavender chips into while the date is distracted. He sees her stealing and refuses the money she is owed. In response to his breach of contract, she throws tray after tray of chips up into the air in the middle of the casino floor. Mickey and Sylvia's Love is Strange plays while people scramble for the chips. In this moment of unbridled joy and uncontainable vigor, Ginger shines. She walks away happy and content with the mess she made, because it wasn't really her mess. It is a consequence of the lack of respect her date showed her. I ran away from home when I was 14 years old and straight into a relationship with notorious pimp Daquan Sawyer. We shared an apartment in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, after many West Side apartments where I wasn't safe outside or allowed to leave the house alone. After a fight on Valentine's Day, I sent him away. He returned after a few hours with a roadside basket of teddy bears and plastic flowers in tow. I refused the gift and tried to close the door in his face. He forced his way in. I remember falling backwards onto the bed and literally seeing stars after his fist made contact with my face. I managed to barricade myself in the bathroom, where he eventually got in and began kicking me as I lay huddled in a ball on the floor. The police showed up, thanks to a concerned neighbor. I did not file charges, which is how it worked in Illinois at that time. Unless the victim opts to press charges in front of her abuser, he goes free. I didn't go to the hospital. In fact, the second he left to go to the store or whatever he was doing, I packed everything I could into my 1991 Buick LeSabre and set out for California, a big fuck you to assault and battery. I stopped in Vegas on my way for a good 2 weeks. Once the bruises had healed, I laid by the pool wearing knockoff Terry Mugler perfume I bought in a casino parking lot and a turquoise bikini, absolutely reveling in my picture-perfect escape. By the middle of the movie, Sam struggles to grip and control, not love and honor his wife. In the first shot of a daytime diner scene, Ginger, dressed in a long white leather coat with ermine fur tails adorning every other inch of leather, like a luxe striped pattern akin to a royal robe, hands a thick envelope of cash across the booth to Lester. Her hair is curled in 1.5-inch barrel curls that cascade to her shoulders. She is smiling and glamorous in a black lurex top underneath her coat and bell-bottom slacks. She walks in and sits down next to Ginger. Sam addresses Lester, says, "Aren't you the card shark, the golf hustler, the pimp from Beverly Hills?" We see a close-up of Lester's face, feigning acknowledgement while looking in Ginger's direction. Sam slams another envelope of cash on the table, daring Lester to take his money too. Lester glances around the room, quickly realizing that there are guys posted at the exits. Ginger's head hangs down, silent and still sitting next to Sam in the booth. She is completely drained of her previous joy. Sam says to Lester, "You did know she was my wife." In the next shot, Lester replies, "Yeah, I did." Sam successfully places property rights on his wife at the same moment that her boyfriend abandons her. Lester gets up and leaves the diner. Sam keeps Ginger in the booth and says, "Lester didn't stop you from marrying me." Sam pulls Ginger up from her seat and says, "Come here, I have something to show you." He grabs her hard by her right arm and drags her out of the diner. I left Las Vegas and arrived in San Francisco to my meth-addled sister and very little money. What I had, I spent in Las Vegas. My sister, Emily, hooked me up with a man she told me was a con artist and a Burning Man type named Oops Megalopoulos. I was told that he had legally changed his name, from what I never knew and I never asked. He hired me to do some odd jobs, the first of which was alphabetizing his Hollywood book collection in a warehouse in South San Francisco. He had what he claimed was the actual swan bed from Sunset Boulevard in that warehouse. I do not know if it was a replica or not. I like to think it wasn't. As my sister became increasingly unreliable, he offered me more money to do menial tasks like driving his car, doing his books, and mostly being eye candy for his mini harem fantasy. I came up with a $1,000 rule, which basically consisted of me needing to have at least that much on my person at all times. I sold the idea to Oops as weekly replenishing bonuses. It worked, and I literally stacked cash while in his employ. There was another girl in Oops's employ, and this one he made his girlfriend. Her name was Carla Leha. Carla and I became very close. We often shared a bed in his 514 South Van Ness Street apartment. He was dosing Carla with Xanax, which has the side effect of amnesia if taken consistently. She became near mute and compliant due to the drugs. The first time I watched Apocalypse Now was with him, which makes perfect sense to me now. In the next shot, Lester is beaten in the parking lot. Ginger is screaming and fighting Sam with her ermine and white leather coat flailing behind her. She is sobbing and begging Sam to make them stop. Sam forces Ginger into his canary yellow Cadillac. It is an apt color and cage for the woman that is now made to be a pet. The scene ends with an aerial shot of Ginger sobbing in the car as it drives out of the parking lot and down the street. The bronco busting Sam engages in with his wife Ginger in this scene doesn't just crack Lester's head, it breaks her heart. Both men have nothing but themselves in mind. Lester wants cash, Sam wants his property to be predictable, controllable, and contained. Ginger's trap is set and snared. She lost all her agency the moment she married Sam. She didn't want to marry him and quickly withered in his yellow Cadillac of a canary cage. I spent years trying to find a white leather and ermine fur coat. I would give anything to have the one she wore in this scene. Stone as Ginger is often referred to as a style icon, but there is so much more to it than that. The dignity that wearing ermine, traditionally the fur of royalty, gives her in a scene where she is literally being taken by her old pimp and pushed around by her new husband is revolutionary. She does not go down quietly. The sentiment is further evidenced later in the film when she refuses to let her unraveling go unwitnessed. A few months into my working relationship with Oops, my ex-pimp boyfriend showed up in San Francisco looking for me. My close relationship with his mother allowed him easy access to my location. I don't think she understood that he would actually come or that I would still love him and need to stay away from him simultaneously. Once he got there, I had to leave Oops's apartment and stay with my sister. This was around the time that she killed her goldfish by holding it in her hand out of the water until it stopped moving. I made a deal with him that he would have one more romantic weekend in Reno with me, and then I would put him on a plane back to Chicago, a plane ticket that I paid for. The morning after, we were pulling away from a motel and pulling up to a stop sign outside of the Circus when the engine of my 1991 Buick LeSabre caught fire. The hood burst open from the heat and we ran. The fire department immediately put the fire out. I heart Reno Fire Department. And I was stranded in Reno with Daquan. After this incident, I convinced Oops to buy me several cars to flip. I never wanted to be without transportation again. We bought a 1969 Cadillac in wisteria, which is a pale fuchsia, a close second to canary yellow, and a 1978 Lincoln Continental in jade green. The Lincoln was my favorite. Ginger shows up at her and Sam's house early in the morning in her 1980s white Mercedes coupe. She pulls up and rams right into his Cadillac, not the canary one she was previously held captive in, but a different one parked in the driveway of their suburban home. Cooped up inside with his shotgun and overwrought with cowardice, Sam looks down upon the destruction from an upstairs window. She continues to slam into his car full force until Sam comes outside. At this point, Ginger pulls towards him, and he scurries back behind the rock wall of the entryway. All the while, Ginger is screaming, "You can't fucking ignore me, you motherfucker." Her rage here is so deeply satisfying and representative of so much more than this scene or the story could ever hope to contain. I, like Ginger, necessitated an escape as a result of an affair. My boss, Oops, was in need of an attorney after illegally grading a road in the Santa Cruz Mountains. The counsel he hired was a handsome man named Charlie. Charlie and I had an affair that was never consummated, but nonetheless impactful. Oops found out and threatened us, him with disbarment and me with poverty. A moment that reverberates in me even now was when he told me to leave his house and go back to my junkie sister. I picked up the blue-petaled stained glass Tiffany lamp that sat in the bedroom I shared with Carla and threw it at him. Then systematically took every car he had purchased for me and hid them in Oakland. By the time Ginger gets out of the car, she hits the ground, drunk and drug-addled. She still looks incredible. She's wearing a taupe leather pantsuit complete with white, pointed, high-heeled boots and a cream sweater. Her hair is shaggy and short, but still golden blonde, and glowing like a fucking crown. She looks skinny and frazzled, but full of righteous rage that animates her. Her boobs by this time are fake. According to Stone's memoir, the use of fake boobs was her idea, and it adds significantly to the character and time period. Her short shag hair and leather pantsuit look is a brash and brazen brand of fuck you femininity that has transformed into a celebrated form of glamour currently inhabited by Lisa Rinna. Rinna's 2022 Real Housewives of Beverly Hills tagline, "Hi, I'm Karma, and yes, I'm a bitch," comes directly from Ginger's lineage. My name was on each vehicle title, but Oops was the lien holder and had the paperwork in his possession. The California DMV had a loophole, and it still might, for all I know. If you report a title as being lost or stolen within the first months of the purchase date, within the first 6 months of the purchase date, you will be issued a new title, rendering any previous title null and void, regardless of if there is a lien holder on the lost or stolen title. That is precisely what I did, making me the sole owner of the vehicles. Years later, I sold the 1978 Lincoln Continental to a teenage kid. 2 days later, the cops came to my door looking for him. He had robbed a liquor store with the car and failed to file his title transfer paperwork with the DMV, so the car was still registered to me. They asked for his contact info. I did not give it to them. It would not have been in alignment with the spirit of the car. This scene ends with her driving away with the keys to the joint safe deposit box in hand. She is desperately trying to secure funds, likely for drugs. I think this is indicative of an addiction whose primary purpose is exiting her body because she can't exit the trap she finds herself in, one that was exclusively built for her by the men around her, Sam, Nikki, and Lester. About a year after the car theft, I was driving from Alaska to San Francisco with my friend Robin, the one who had recently purchased a 1976 Lincoln in the spirit of the 78 that we shared while working as cocktail waitresses. I had not been able to reach Carla, who was still living with and dating Oops for weeks. We spoke once after I left. When Robin and I were in Portland, I called Charlie, the attorney. He was the one that told me that Carla had died. She overdosed in Death Valley with Oops. I never for 1 second believed she overdosed on accident. He killed her. Either through carelessness or with intention, he killed her. I recently looked him up to see if I could figure out who he really was. His name is Eric John Diesel. He is a mathematician with ties to Stanford, and he's a murderer. Ginger's hysterical expression of injury was incredibly impactful for me as a young woman. It is a deeply satisfying thing to see a woman show you what has been done to her. I have most certainly found myself screaming on a lawn or two in my day, during addiction or otherwise. I also specifically bought an early 1980s Mercedes and a fur coat to perform this brand of womanhood as soon as I was able. Ginger will always be my hero and, in my opinion, the cowboy of the female experience. Thank you.
Our next reader is William Lockwood. While a Texan by birth, he too has traversed the continent to its far eastern and western coasts. Amidst other odd jobs, he has worked as a set builder, prop master, truck driver, and art handler. Currently, he is a writer and filmmaker trying to survive the never-ending disaster that is the United States of America. W.G. Sebald tells us that it's hard to write something original about Napoleon, but one of his minor aides is another matter. Likewise, Lockwood is the kind of figure who in a century hence would be fascinating to write of, were he not a fascinating writer in his own right. Centrifugal in scope, sardonic and droll, in a style wrought finely enough to bring the most peculiar epicure to satiety, it is my honor to welcome on stage William Lockwood.
That was too nice, Brandon. I don't think I'm going to be able to live up to that. But let's see what I have here. I'm going to read one section from a chapter from the thesis I've been working on. I don't think you need to know much. It's about an accountant that goes to the movies. That's about it. All right. Yesterday's tribulations tempted me to entertain the need for another world, to turn at least one eye away from this place for a while.
Wondering if I could renew some faith in the necessity of aesthetic devotions, I made the whimsical decision to educate myself on the cinema's latest. What a mistake. Monopolization has made the choosings meager. If superheroes don't get your salivation going, you're out of luck. Nevertheless, I adjusted my glasses, adopted an anthropologist's stance, and entered the Cineplex. Flocks of teenagers were taking their horniness out for a tepid test drive. More than the unavoidable acne and awkwardness of that age, it seemed as though their devices were the real factors throwing up roadblocks for any haptic exploration. Maybe they were setting up meetings like they'd seen their parents do, 15-year-olds cornering the market on some lithium supply. But more likely, they were making today's equivalent of world headlines in 3-second bursts showcasing the way they can make their face dance. It's hard to say who or what the accessory is in this situation anymore. Or, I've messed that up, it's all right. I see it at school all the time. Oh, she works at a school. I don't know what happens inside their hands, and I'm not sure that I care. But these phones, objects intrinsically devoid of pizzazz, did have an unusual allure for me last night. The highly sophisticated, if incredibly stupid pieces of technology in the hands of these young people, who seem to have asked an internet image search for 1999 fashion to throw up all over them, made for an intriguing anachronism. Once I recognized them as walking, talking wormholes, I had a greater appreciation. But the men, so many men, ages 25 to 60, soggy pack mules for a whole slew of manifest and latent crises, devout and ready to invest the screen with desperate dreams of swapping bodies for the computer-rendered endowments that would flash before them. Some of these beasts were even coupled. However, the referent together would likely be inaccurate. The begrudged pairings looked more like lost bets or hostage situations. The only individuals whose enthusiasm for the evening could be excused was the small children. However, I did become angered by the fact that these little ones were unaware that they already possessed the only real and true superhuman capacity, youth. Most of them did not need escapism yet, so what were they doing here at the Cineplex? The answer was candy. It made me sad to know that their innocent addiction to sugar would inadvertently expose them to a miasma of indoctrinating imagery and seriously fraught ideologies. The objects that delivered dialogue and carried out elaborate choreography on the screen, what we were supposed to believe were characters, looked more like prisoners of some gamified purgatory. Sometimes they seemed surprised to find themselves there. These computer-rendered inmates were caught in the flashing, booming, and swirling phantasmagoria of fetishes, and I almost felt bad for half a second, and pondered how I might aid in an operation to save them, but then remembered that they had plenty of force fields on their side and an army of producers with serious economic incentives for making sure their plots always had a loophole available. Should one die, you can guarantee that the franchise has already devised a resurrection plan. A new one will be out in 2 months, tops. Nothing is at stake. You start to wonder if these spectacles are made not just by, but entirely by and for machines, which begs the question of how and where the human viewer should be situated in this affective circuit, if at all. And yet, I still found myself asking, could my hair do that? Do they make unitards for the shape that I'm in? How would latex mesh with my arrangement? Would my superpower be anything more than an ultra-repellent force? Do I really need a metonymic laser field to say stay the fuck away from me at a volume higher than the one I already project? After the movie was done thrusting itself into our retinas, we filed out the aisles. In shuffling past the detritus of our consumption, which had been tossed to the floor in that quintessentially American statement of someone else's problem, I stepped in something so aggressively sticky that I tracked it into the office with me today. In the theater's lobby, back under the sapping green fluorescence, I found that no one wanted to look at anyone. It was as if we were all embarrassed to still be humans after that experience. We were disheartened by having to reconfront reality's truculence towards comic book logic. There were no multiverses, no glowing gems that could alter the course of history, only exit signs, car keys, and a watch to tell you that you needed to be at work in a few hours. My grandmother's favorite movies always had someone's voice. usually a woman's, that was saying something like, "Oh, please take me somewhere far away from here, somewhere far, far away from here." And then they'd faint. It was so rare that they actually made it out, or if they did, you never got to see where they went or how they fared after they arrived. But maybe you shouldn't, in order to protect the lie, in order to not feel the barb and the hook of hope's lure. Now I'm going to read a statement from one of the things trapped inside one of those movies. I keep coming out of character for this tapping on the window, this vague rhythm that threatens to be a message. This nightly occurrence is making me lose credibility with the ones that have their machines trained on me. If I can't get enough of the traits to come together and stay together for me, I will no longer be recognizable as the thing that I'm supposed to be convincing the machine lovers that I can play at being. If the message keeps coming to the window, this capability will be dragged out of me forever. I will be seen as more than I am and too much to frame. I'm going to read one other thing that I finished this morning, so this will be a real experiment. It's also very short, so don't worry. Okay. The crisis plan designer has the bad habit of only finding interest in the dire. The most minor conversations with him feel like interrogations. Within the first few minutes, he wants to know what's most important to you. He is not one to allow for not knowing, and he has not practiced patience with those that cannot readily invent it. We watched him on a date once. This person that was subjected to him happened to be a wedding photographer, a seemingly good match, being someone that forecasts, forces connections, forges images of commitment. But even they were put off. Every time this person had a pleasant nothing to say, he could not manage. His calculations sniffed right through them. He could tell there was no potential disaster present, so he was ready to not be involved. After their first few lines of dialogue, he was doing the thing we know he always does when he is no longer there. He was saying, "Very cool, very cool." That's it.
I just realized that I've been welcoming everyone on stage. No stages before us, so I forgive you all. It's kind of a gulf between writing and reality that, Anyhow, our penultimate reader, Colin Bailey Yonkman, comes to us proudly, twice proudly, thrice proudly, from the state of Michigan, the stalwart seat of this country's industrial gumption, the evergreen host to sumptuous Great Lakes, lustrous snowfall, and dare I say, I don't really need to dare to say it, it's kind of a fact, some of the finest recordings in the history of American music. In her own words, she is a multimodal storyteller and teaching artist with a heart for nature and wild, feral things. Her use of prose, photography, songwriting, and performance seeks to translate body and place, embracing a dislocation of self and memory. Lighting through cognitive dissonance, a place of coming to know within the balance and imbalance of grief and joy, her work interrogates the past to relocate the present, creating future homes. She currently resides in Los Angeles, where she continues her lifelong search for cold water. I could not have written it better myself. Please welcome to the podium, Colin Bailey Yonkman.
So there's no mystery is where I'm from. Thank you so much to Jimmy and to Beyond Baroque for having us here. I know it's kind of like tight in the city this week, so we appreciate you having us here. We're so excited to be here. And thank you to Brandon for writing such beautiful introductions for us and getting us all going today. So thank you so much. No, please. These are three small sections from My thesis, they don't really go together, but they don't like not go together. So we'll have to see what happens. I left LA. I went out through the Mojave, the heat insane at over 100 degrees, 101, then 105, then 112. Permanent signs warn drivers to turn off the AC while ascending into higher elevations. At rest areas, I take pictures and listen to the bachelor parties booze cruising to Vegas. They shotgun beers before getting back on the highway. Driving through Vegas is overstimulating after the slow, hot desert, and I can't get through it fast enough. The colors shift from tan, purple, and gray to orange. Golden orange Utah and Mormons living in the gateway to Zion. In St. George, I hit a diner that was filled with locals in a post-basketball game haze. The teenagers are so horny they can't make eye contact with one another. I overhear a mother and a father telling their young children over shakes and fries how nervous they were the first time they coupled after getting married. It wasn't a preoccupation or fear of the evils of passion. It was a space that was dripping with sexual tension. I left thinking everyone should just make out and see where it goes. Hit the valve and relax. I thought that's what I was doing. A road trip to feed my brain and body, a quick stop at my cousin Ella's to ask a few questions, a stop over at Hemingway's in Idaho to ask a few more, desert and mountain camping, fly fishing and wandering, hit the road and see where it goes. I camped above the redacted creek on the side of a mountain outside of Vail. I spent the evening in the stream pulling brook trout out from their hiding places in the mouths of inlets, runoffs from the beaver dams that co-engineered the mountain valley with water. I had dinner with another camper, a backpacker with a wolf dog. We stayed up late talking. He told me about his life, his girlfriends, and the arguments they had been having. That communications degree always comes in handy. He took out a pen and recorded what I said, hoping to remember the context and advice in the morning through the haze of the shitty beer he was riding on that night. I told him how afraid I was when I had driven up into the mountain meadow the day before. I switched back until Highway 70 was nothing but a pencil line beneath me. The landscape went lush, scrubby, and then opened out onto large pines and grass meadows, ice-cold snow-fed lakes that sat in the middle of stands of purple lupine. I was trying to get to a campground to stay in for the night, but an avalanche of thick-grained snow over the road stopped me. My anxiety started to rise, and the thought of coming down off the mountain frightened me. I was up too high, with no plan and no cell service. Going up a mountain is easier than coming down. I'd much prefer the weight at the back of the car, fighting the forward motion of an engine and drive. Going down places the gas in the same direction as the bottom, and riding the brake doesn't begin to describe what it takes to descend. As soon as I knew I was afraid to come down, I knew I had to do it right then. I'd spooked myself, which happens from time to time when you're alone in the woods or have pushed yourself too far away from what's comfortable. On my way out, I came upon a truck that had fallen 2 switchbacks down the mountain, and it was now on its back, wheels in the air, a group of people standing above it, scratching their heads. I inched around the vehicle, making my way slowly, eyes focused on the inside edge, giving all my attention to the flowers, and pushing out the image of the highway winding too far below. Foot firmly on the brake, down the mountain, John Denver singing my anxiety away. Between tracks, he told stories of Los Angeles, of sneaking out to the lifeguard stands to write music in the middle of the night. I spent the night in a cheap hotel in Vail, an oxymoron. I beat myself up for not being able to handle the mountaintop, having to pay for a shitty hotel. I wondered what was wrong with me, what had happened that had sucked away all my bravery. You should be a writer, the backpacker announced as he went off to his tent that night. It was both validating and embarrassing to tell him that. Yeah, I'm trying. We'd planned to fish the next morning, but when I woke up, he was gone. I didn't even know his name. Years before, I had hiked into the Redacted River, a place that took hours by 2 tracks to get to, a place that had unusual elevation for Michigan, a place where I found wildflowers on mossed, stumped islands, new species that had pushed me to my field guides to identify. Left to its own discretion, the river and its beavers had created marshes, islands, split the stream in 2, 3, 4 channels that all flanked with old-growth cedars. I waded and casted along the first inlet. A car stopped and took my picture, asked if I'd released my image to a local sporting magazine. Sure, I thought, but I never saw it. Not looking for conversation, I moved on and walked across the cemented beaver dam to find a place to get in where it wasn't too deep and would allow for a few hundred yards of wading. I thought the dam was defunct and reinforced by the DNR to keep the marsh habitat. As I lowered into the river, a dark shadow moved through the channel in front of me. I stood in the water and debated. I had seen beaver before. They usually fear humans. They usually work at night. I'd seen what they look like after being trapped or drowned or shot. My father and me routinely pulled out beaver dams on our property to prevent the back 40 acres from flooding. My father brought a folding chair out to the river at night and shot them before it got dark. We set traps in their mudslides. Ethics or morals didn't play into it. This was tradition, not just of my family, but of the land itself. French trappers, indigenous tribes. The beaver are a key species in the ecology and history of the region. In hindsight, we should have left the dams in place and let the land do what it needed. I figured I just kicked up a beaver, like I'd done to deer, turkey, mink, moose, and muskrat. When you quietly move through wild places, you surprise wild animals. The beaver would find a place downstream to watch me, but I'd likely not see her again. I waded downstream from the dam, a big pool sitting above me on the other side, and sat on a log that had fallen across my feet into the water. A big hole sat to my right, too deep to see the bottom. I changed my fly and I listened. Out of my peripheral vision, I caught her swimming down an inlet, back and forth, checking on me. I looked back at the dam I just crossed and this time spotted 2 fluffy beaver pups sitting on top, and it was then I realized I was in a lot of trouble. The cement on the dam was sun-dry hardened clay, reinforced not by the DNR, but by a mother. The dam was active, and the den sat along the big pool above me and out of my sight. I frantically looked for a way out, but I'd crossed the dam because the marsh was dangerous to enter. Inlets and holes are hard to decipher under tall grass and stream vegetation. The way in could not be the way out. She had me pinned against the dam and her pups, the wilderness, and the marsh. I began to hope that if I stayed still enough, I could wade downstream away from them far enough where she'd feel comfortable with my presence. But a big shadow came from the hole under my feet, and as she took to the surface, she rolled on her back, brushing against my shins with her body, and slapped her paddled tail against the water in the loudest crack that flooded my ears and covered me with river water. I was drenched and shaking from adrenaline. I got out through the marsh, fast and working hard, my knees to my chest to climb through the inlets without breaking a leg in a hidden hole. My waders became black and reeked of minerals, swamp mud now exposed to oxygen, encrusting my legs. I moved 2 miles downstream and caught brookies from the bank until dark, and coyotes pushed me back into my car and onto the road. I didn't get back into the water that day. You never know when the last time will be the last time. Even when you make a decision, new information presents itself and changes your mind. It's true that I felt the end approaching for my dad and me for many years. I began to have more patience, more time to spare. We spent more time together at the cabin. We went fishing in Montana twice. It's also true that his death was my biggest fear and had hung over me since I was a child. He was an older dad, something that never really mattered but was put into my head by strangers and people at the grocery store, old coworkers and hostesses at restaurants. Your grandfather is sitting right over there. And whose child would that make me? My father inherited his mother's bones and needed hip replacements when I was in high school. One of the parts they put in him had oil on it and was recalled, so he's had 3 replacements. He took the money from the settlement and gutted the cabin. Before then, you'd have to wash anything that you brought up, even if you didn't wear it. Years of wet dog and muddy boots, mice and spilled whiskey and soda, cigars and ash cigarettes. It all stuck to the carpet and hung in the air, the stench coating anything that came into contact with the cabin. There's no hot water, electrical fires. I had a bedroom on the main floor next to my parents', and that room used to be my grandparents' room. In the refurb, it became an entryway. I never got used to seeing my father in the hospital. Not after 3 hip replacements and subsequent repositioning appointments, and not after spinal fusions, shoulder surgeries, or cancer removals. He had a bad reaction to pain medication, and my mother called me to help her watch him. I got there not understanding what she could possibly mean. He'd had spinal fusion at the base of his neck and was supposed to be laying down in bed. Instead, he was standing on top of the bed, neck brace on the floor, pulling at invisible fishing line he saw hanging from the ceiling along the skylight. I got him back down in bed and laid next to him. Look at it. Do you see the filament? I tried to convince him that we could leave it there. I tried to get up and remove it, pantomiming the line of spooling in my fingers. Eventually, I gave him a broom and we brushed away the filament as it appeared flat on our backs. The last time we went hunting together was an accident. I woke up at 5:45 in the morning to pack a breakfast and lunch to eat in the deer blind. I wanted to get to my blind before all the men took the ATVs out of the barn and roared them past me on the north pipeline to disperse to where they'd be sitting. My father insisted on baiting for me, something that was still legal then, and I knew he'd come around with corn, and so did the deer. I preferred to walk to my blind, and I did so in the purple light of a lightning sky. It was cold, and the grass crunched under my boots. The moisture crystallized on tree branches. There was a near full moon still hanging in the west sky. After the others went by, my father came through and raised his arms as he did. I clicked my headlamp on and off in response. I poured a cup of coffee, and before I got to have any of the required amount, 3 does ran out of the woods and down my northwest lane, and they were twitchy. I grabbed my rifle, opened my window, and sighted where the does had appeared. My heart was beating in my chest. I breathed in, 1, 2, 3, and out, 1, 2, 3, and an 8-point the size of a 10 steps out. He was easily over 200 pounds. He sniffed the air and started to follow the does until he heard a noise, and I heard it too. It was the roar of an engine in the morning woods was coming toward us from the south. The buck tucked into the brush, hiding in a keyhole of poplar. He'd have to step out to one side or the other eventually. I stepped out of the blind just as my father pulled up. I raised both my arms, stopping him. Turn off the lights. Kill the engine. And I stepped back in the blind and we waited. Perhaps 30 seconds passed in silence. I tried to breathe. 1, 2, 3. Killing an animal is not easy, and I don't do it very often. A few birds and fish a year, and a deer if I can get one, but I don't take the shot unless it's a sure thing, and I usually wait too long in the season, or I get distracted in a book, or watching some birds with my binoculars, or I just don't feel like it, so I've only taken 5. But when you decide to do it, you've got to keep yourself calm. You have to keep breathing. You have to keep steady. You owe the animal a clean shot. You have to do it right. When he stepped out, I heard my father gasp. I wanted him to step out completely, but my father was whispering, "Shoot, shoot, shoot." But I didn't. I waited. He took 2 more steps and froze, and I shot him right through the heart. Thank you.
It's such a mystery, I know. Oh wow, we're really good on time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, everyone, for a round of applause, please, for everyone who's gone. I suppose it is no great pain for me to divulge my given name, which I won't do right now because it's already been done. But should I have the fortune of seeing my works set in print and hawked forth under the aegis of a purse other than my own, it's all too likely that they shall appear under a sobriquet of my own choosing. The business of selecting a nom de plume is a rather sticky one. I suppose it's like those cellular self-portraits we see of a figure we know from real life that convey not the slightest charm of the person we know. At the same time, the gravest missteps are all too obvious. So, please be assured, if one day you see a novel attributed to Stenorius Flaskback, or Emerald Ivy Knee, or Victoria Vanderbilt, or Hector Abocan, it shall not belong to the pen of the incidental fellow standing before you now. Thank you for the uncomfortable jitters. I'm going to read this story I wrote. It's called Fugazi. The first things we remembered from the 20th century weren't even real. Authentic, I mean, though how to make such distinctions has long been lost. Instincts preterite, rotten. Nor were they proper names. Sean Young, Yogi Berra, they came later. The first transcriptions, after the necessary equipment had been salvaged, ferruginous conductive wires, sallow plasticine boxes with convex glass faces, were largely inscrutable. Whence these initial objects came, moreover how they survived, is likewise unknown. Though among the earliest recorders competent exegetes were few, the hermeneutic literature since produced, over the course of a decade, outweighs the contents of the first list several times over. That, too, is conjectural. The first memory object, lost, stolen, or destroyed, has since vanished. Yet its contents, however kludged and gappy, sketchy and factitious they may be, are easily reproducible. 1. Visions of an Ottoman Pedagogue.txt. This course examines what can only be roughly translated into, rough on account of the original manuscript's thoroughly tatterdemalion aspect, rain-strewn and ink-riven across millennia, hawkish, the little-known integer system developed in medieval Japan by monks of an order so obdurately abstinent as to hasten their extinction to a date so close to its founding that later scribes, mistaking it for a misprint or distant rumor, failed to propagate its creed any further. The system worked by counting 3 numbers ahead, then subtracting 1, multiplying that one by 16, then finding the square root of the third, then cubing that thrice over, and lastly subtracting by 2. We will read work from Dick Santoro, Judy Asclepian, Sage Fawcett, Rudy Waller, and many more. Customers should expect to spend about $900.17 on course materials. Meets Wednesdays, 7 to 8:30 a.m. in sub 33V. Taught by Joe. 2. Petition _Ballycorp_draft.txt. Veritable dens of vice. We find that the following amusement devices, Centaur and The Lost World respectively, inhibit the moral rectitude of our town's youth. Please remove your wares immediately. We have collected blank thousand signatures from citizens of the most respectable sort. Silent no more. 3. Letters of JG.txt. Notes, open bracket, ellipses, closing bracket, indicates material redacted by request of the estate. Letter of December 5th, 1991. Dear W. Evening, dearest. One day soon will redacted and redacted, like that time in Gatlinburg, yeah? You'll need to remember to bring that redacted and those redacted as well. Many thanks for passing on your monograph. Your insights on the Rosicrucians of 18th century Paris and Renaissance angelology remind me a lot of the album poetry Montesquieu, who, at 16, copulated in a sculpture garden with the Swiss governess of a neighboring family, herself charged with educating his rival in Latin composition, who later took up studies in medicine at the tender age of 17 on the Chesapeake coast, where he first began drafting a treatise on the endocrine system that would remain influential for decades, till that scientific stare decisis expired, wrote for Lady Rathbone, his landlord's scream-sneeze interrupting his cogitations. Thanks anyways, JG. 4. Spoon number 3.txt. In the morning's review, removing a Needta pill from a pink patent leather clutch. 5. Acrostical fragments.txt. Telekinetic theft, cowboy mouth, teenage volatility. Again, whither went this first object, none know. Like the others, those that remain, and have since been cataloged, ordered, labeled, it was stiff, square, wafer-like. Though they are primarily dark gray in color, with silver and black interstices, circles and squares within, the more zealous among us, in numinous frenzies of fascimilation, imagine them as aubergine. Makeshift systems, played by the quantum copyists, partly blind, attend the labors of the still capable. It won't go on for much longer. The rest of the work, sifting through the JPEGs, DocXs, PDFs presently in numeric dishabille, labeled in cryptic sobriquets, will soon be effable, clear. Even the canaille will come to understand our labors, come to wear our habits of pan. So we lie in the temple, faded, waiting for some new threnody, some new paroxysm to take us away or seal us up, mute as objects. Thank you. That's it. Thank you, everyone, for coming out again.
Brendan Cooper, folks, please give it up to all of our writers. Thanks y'all for being here. We got a bookstore if you haven't checked it out. We got a gallery upstairs for you to hang out. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.